Right, so I'll be honest with you guys. I'm here for two reasons. I work at the same time at the Copernicus Science Centre, and just a quick question, how many of you know what the Copernicus Science Centre is? Or how many of you have been there? Okay, so there's a person who doesn't know what it is but has been there. That's interesting. So to those of you that do not know what Copernicus Science Centre is, it's the biggest, when it comes to number of visits, science center, educational science center in Europe. We have 1 million visitors every year, and we don't quite even know why so many. And the second place I work in is I'm employed by the European Space Agency, and you can see the logo there. So how many of you guys have heard about the ESA before? Okay, so not too many actually. So ESA is the European Space Agency. If you guys are Europeans, that means this is your space agency, and we build stuff for you. So I'm here in sort of with two hats. The first hat is the European Space Agency. We're at Infoshare, so I'll try to tell you guys how can you work with ESA, how can you work for ESA, how can you be hired by ESA, and whether startups have any place within the space sector. And then my second hat is the educator's hat, and I'm working with a couple of startups right now that do space education. So, and I'd like to hire a couple more. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. So just to quickly show you how I'm going to talk about it is first, we'll talk about what ESA has been doing in the past and what we intend to do in the next 20, maybe 30 years. Second thing, we'll try to talk about how do we get into the distant future, into the 40 years realm. And then finally, I need you guys a lot, because my job is to educate, to bring a whole group of new startuppers within the next 20 to 30 years. And I want them to be the best people we can make. And I need your help, guys, because you're the ones who know exactly what kind of a person we should teach, what kind of a person we should educate. So I'll ask you for your input a lot in the end. So first, let's start with the past 50 years of ESA, just to bring you up to speed.
5, 4, 3, 2, unité, top.
The first Ariane launch, a milestone in history as Europe entered the select club of space powers. For the newly created European Space Agency, this confirmed Europe's independent launch capability, a key condition for any meaningful space program. Today, Ariane is now in its 5th generation, and with Soyuz now operating from Kourou and the new Vega launcher, Europe has complete autonomy and the capability to launch any satellite to any orbit. With independent access assured, ESA has been able to cover all the domains of space, conceiving things that nobody has done before. Landing on Saturn's largest moon, landing on a comet, mapping our galaxy with unprecedented accuracy, producing the most precise map ever of the first light of the universe, better understanding our planet and the causes and effects of climate change. And at the same time, ESA has been central to European industry's development of systems and applications essential to the needs of our citizens. Without satellites, daily life would grind to a halt. No entertainment or telecommunications, no navigation, no meteorology. Most services we take for granted today rely on space. Space is key for our future, for our society, sometimes even for saving lives. Space is also key for our economy. Every euro invested in space applications returning more than 20 euros. Space is also fundamental in inspiring society, in motivating our youth to undertake scientific and technical studies vital for Europe's future. All this is possible because, 50 years ago, European leaders with vision took key decisions. In 1964, the creation of ELDO to develop a shared European launcher, and ESERO, dedicated to building scientific satellites, gave the initial impetus for the successful industry we have today, and paved the way for the creation of ESA. Nowadays, thanks to ESA and its member states, the most advanced satellites and space infrastructures are developed in Europe. And the European space industry is able to master the most advanced technologies, from future all-electrical satellites to new systems integrating telecommunications, navigation, and Earth observation. It's a competitive and innovative industry which supports growth and creates jobs, ensuring that Europe faces the challenges of the future. ESA, backed by its member states, makes it possible, a major asset for Europe. ESA, serving European cooperation and innovation for a better future.
So that's 2 years ago. Obviously not that much has changed since then. So a quick question so I know who I'm talking to. How many of you have ever worked with ESA specifically? One, two people. How many of you have ever worked with any space industry or a space application whatsoever? It's the same two people. So there's a whole bunch of you that have never worked with space and could do it. So let me tell you now, how can you approach that pretty difficult topic to start. So first of all, you have seen what ESA has been doing for the past 50 years. Now, what do we have in store for the next 10, 20, 30, and where can you get into it? So in ESA, we have a lot of funny names for funny offices, like there is a Future Missions Office, there is the Advanced Concepts Team, there is literally something called a Future Proofing Lab. This is the kind of skunk works of the European Space Agency. And funnily enough also, I mean, you get to do an awesome job when you come at Monday to your workplace and your boss sets your objective in front of you, and the objective is to achieve the Cosmic Vision Plan. And that's something that ESA is planning, and I'll tell you more about it in a second. But the Future Missions Office that I would like you to get slightly interested in is responsible for mission studies and planning missions that we're building right now, and then trying to figure out how can basically business people get into it and start producing parts for the missions, producing entire missions, etc. And then there is the second team which we have that is tasked with the future, which is called the Advanced Concepts Team. And these guys are awesome, honestly. If you ever had a chance to meet anybody from the Advanced Concepts Team, do it. They work on the tasks that we think will be a problem in 10 to 20 years. They're absolutely forbidden on working on any topics that have any applicability to today, unless there is, for example, a startup or somewhere that figures out how to make this a business reality right now. And I just put in a couple of research publications they have published over the last 3 years that just shows you how outlandish some of the ideas are. One is Spider-Man spacecraft, tethered asteroid hopping in the main belt, social inspired multi-robot coverage. I don't even know what social has to do with it. Sounds very startup-y to me. And then finally, 2 generic concepts for space propulsion based on thermonuclear fusion. If you ever think you're doing anything innovative, to these guys, nuclear fusion propulsion is generic, as a slow Tuesday. So these guys are thinking massively ahead of the curve, and you can tap onto what they come up with as well, because these guys are hired by ESA only for 2 years. They come to the European Space Agency, work there for 2 years, and then they have to leave. And most of them leave back to their research, say universities, etc. But at least half of them leave to start up their own businesses or to be hired by you, for example, guys. And as Kira has talked earlier, some of you guys are very good in doing business. We as researchers, and my background is in astronomy, I've been an astronomer for the past 8 years. We are really good in having a specific skill that you might be able to sell. So if you ever come across this name, the Advanced Concepts Team, and you ever meet any of these people, honestly, do consider talking to them more and thinking whether you can do any business with them. But I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the cosmic vision. So the huge plan that ESA has, which spans from 2015 to 2025 and even further into the future, which defines what kind of space missions we'll be building, what the missions will try to achieve, and how do we work with the industry. And you can see that typically space missions take at least 2 decades to build. So in case of a massively successful mission, Cassini-Huygens, which went to Titan, the moon of Saturn, the mission was, you can see the lander over there on the bottom. The lander has actually landed on the moon of Saturn, on Titan. It was proposed in 1982 and then arrived in 2005. That's 23 years from, not even from the conception, from the moment it was proposed. So it was already a mature idea by that time. So altogether, the whole idea was gestating for about 30 years. It sounds like a very long horizon, right? I know many of you guys work with horizons of a year or 2 years. If your startup survives 2 years, that's apparently good, is what people tell me. If it survives into its 3rd year, you're already a massive success. So I can imagine that slotting into something that lasts 20 or 25 or 30 years is pretty difficult for you because you might not be thinking with such long time spans. But fortunately, this is all broken into chunks, and I'll show you the chunks in the middle and how you can tie into those. So the goals of the cosmic vision, to me, are absolutely fantastic because, as I said, I'm an astronomer. So to me, these questions are pretty important. Starting from very grand questions like how did the universe originate and what is it made of, to something pretty simple when it comes to astronomy, which is how does the solar system work. And I'd like to show you what kind of missions we are building within this frame of the cosmic vision. So right now, these are all the missions we at ESA are working on. All the missions that are specifically science missions. I'm not talking about telecommunication satellites, etc., even though these are awesome and very interesting as well. These are just the science missions, and we divide them into 3 categories. Like in a shop, the small, the medium, the large. And they literally are that. The small missions are worth about 50 million euro, so that's quite a lot, but at the same time, in the grand scheme of things, not that much. There is one currently. It's called Cheops. Small missions are the kind of missions we just find a really cool idea and decide to develop a space mission around it. The technology has to be already there, so there is not that much innovation going on regarding technology. It's just an idea, all right, how about we build this tiny telescope using proven technology, send it in space and start observing stars. That's literally this idea. Cheops is a small telescope which is going to be launched in 2018 to look at exoplanets, planets outside of the solar system. Then there are the M-class missions. These are big deals. These are the workhorses of the European Space Agency right now when it comes to space exploration. M-class missions are roughly worth 500 million euros. This is all in euros. And when you figure out an idea for a mission like that, you propose it around 12 years before it gets launched. So you say in case of Solar Orbiter, the first one you can see in here, it was most likely proposed roughly around 2004. Then there was a 2 to 3 years tech development cycle, and this is when ESA gets in touch with very innovative companies that can develop new ideas on how to build spacecraft and just bring them to a point where they are really feasible to build. And there are 3 of those right now. And I can talk for hours about interesting politics related to that, how do you secure funding coming from these missions, etc. It is a political game a lot. For example, in case of Plato, it was selected as one of the missions worth 500 million euros because the British, who worked a lot within this field, really wanted to help their optics industry. So they decided to push for this mission specifically because it requires a lot of optics, a lot of research going into optics. And as a result, they will pump over 50 million euro into their optics industry. And we can do a lot of things like that as well, but pumping into a specific industry means pumping into you guys if you just happen to be in the right industry. And that's the kind of message I'll try to convey in a second, but generally look at these missions, look at these tech development timeframes, and on the ESA website, you can find information about every single one of these missions. It even says what kind of technology ESA will be developing in the next 5 years or in the next 10 years related to these missions. If you just happen to have a startup, or if you just happen to have a know-how related to any of these fields, start looking at ESA, start talking to ESA about maybe being selected as the company to develop the technology further. And then there are obviously the Aircast missions. These are the flagship, the biggest missions ESA does. They're rated at $1 billion plus, which to me is just absolutely insane. And it is $1 billion plus. These can be 4 billion euro missions. And they're usually done in collaboration with other space agencies. It's usually not just ESA. It's ESA with NASA, it's ESA with the Japanese Space Agency, with somebody else. And they are proposed almost 20 years ahead. So right now we are actually in discussions about a mission which is not going to go up before 2036. And that's a whole massive challenge. And you can see the tech development phase here lasts 7 to 8 years, which is the time when you can sort of jump into it and start profiting on the occasions. And just to show you, so when are the points where you can sort of jump into it? At ESA, we divide things into 9 different phases where you can jump into it. These are TRLs, so technology readiness levels. The first 3, the ones in orange, the TRL 1, 2, and 3, this is just sort of basic research. We try and figure out what could be built. You don't have to build it yet. You don't even have to have a proper prototype. It's just a sort of the proof of concept. Maybe there is an idea of building a new mirror you could put on a space telescope. You don't even have to have an idea of what space telescope, but maybe there is a need for mirrors. If you are doing something related to, so I'm talking here about space missions and space exploration, but there is human flight as well. If you happen to have a startup that deals with human biology, you might be proposing to ESA to work on an idea of how to preserve human life in orbit a bit better. And this will fit in within the TRLs 1, 2, and 3. Just generally trying to figure out what science is capable of doing right now. At this stage, when you get to TRL 3 and you have a technology which seems to be feasible, you can start proposing a space mission around it, or there is already a proposed space mission there. And then we get into the critical base technology. So if the technology is mature enough for us to be able to launch it into space pretty soon, and we believe this is really going to happen, this is a technology worth pursuing, then ESA core technology program takes over and starts searching for companies that can actually develop prototypes, then can test them and retest them, first in a lab environment, then in a simulated real environment, as close to, say, if you want to have a mission to Mars, you will be testing in a Martian type environment, etc. And this is a place where, again, if you have a startup, if you have a company that deals with this kind of stuff, this is the moment you should be getting interested in some of the missions I showed you in here. All these missions are already in the critical base technology phase. So they're already building prototypes of the mission. And then there's the final phase. After 7 or 8 years of tech development in case of L mission, or 2-3 years in case of M mission, we get into the TRL 6. So a model that actually demonstrates that the spacecraft would work. If you get through the 6th level, then the mission is accepted. It gets funded with all the remaining funding that hasn't been spent just yet, and you start building the actual satellite. And this is again a place where ESA will be sending out tenders, inviting people to work on building the actual satellite. I know that for some reason I keep coming across people that think that NASA builds their own spacecraft or that ESA builds its own spacecraft. We don't. We hire people to build spacecraft for us. And these people hire other companies to build subsystems for them, and these people hire other people to do coding for them, etc. So it's not all inside of the European Space Agency. We mostly do administration, hiring, etc., but we do not really build satellites on our own. Not that much, at least. And then you get transferred into ESA project team. So what are the biggest missions that will be happening soon that you might be getting interested in already? Now, the first thing, and this is a slide I picked up from the meeting at the European Space Agency just a month ago. This is the sort of the roadmap we have for the next decades. The first thing that we are concentrating on right now, and that a lot of money goes into, is the International Space Station. It's not really becoming any bigger that much. We're just bringing a lot of experiments on board. And these experiments have to be built and tested on Earth. So you could be getting in touch with researchers at your local universities, trying to figure out whether you can build together a piece of equipment that's going to fly to the International Space Station. But ISS, the International Space Station, will continue up until about 2020, maybe 2024. There isn't that much funding for it to continue until 2030. At least nobody has agreed on it yet. So we think we'll be most likely retiring it by mid-20s. So if we're retiring International Space Station, what are we going to do instead? Well, first of all, you can see there is a whole small sliver there, commercial, government, low Earth orbit platforms and missions. These are all the telecommunicational satellites, communication in orbit, Earth observation satellites, etc. There's a whole bunch of those, and I won't talk about them now. Now, the next big thing we're planning to do is send missions further out. So you can see there's a whole array of missions that are gonna go to Mars. ExoMars has already been launched, the first part of it. Mars 2020 and JAXA Mars Precursor are going to get launched in the future. And there's a whole bunch of space exploration missions I have talked about earlier. And there is a whole bunch of robotic missions that are planning to go to Moon pretty soon. And obviously the very exciting part that is about to start now is more ambitious human missions, going to maybe explore the near-Earth asteroid, and NASA is really interested in that. Maybe extended duration crew missions, whether on ISS initially and later on potentially on the Orion capsule that can go around the Moon and then stay in orbit and then come back. These are some of the sort of first test missions to send humans further out than just our own orbit. And then ESA and NASA split. NASA's goal is to go to Mars. And they are really sure that this is what they want to do. They're not that much interested in Moon. They want to send a human being to Mars. And they seem to be working pretty hard on that, both on the governmental side and on the side of the private business there. You might have heard about SpaceX. Now, ESA actually wants to go to the Moon. Our Director General has defined our mission for now to figure out how to get to the Moon, but in a sort of sustainable way, which is don't just get to the Moon and then come back. Get to the Moon and actually set up something he called a lunar village there. And the lunar village, the idea of it is we don't actually want ESA to send astronauts to the Moon just to stand around or maybe gather some samples and chill, and that's it. We'd actually like to build an infrastructure that companies can use on the Moon. And there's already 6 startup companies that are thinking of utilizing such a basic infrastructure. By infrastructure, I mean that ESA will take care of bringing electricity to the village, maybe providing some basic habitats, maybe providing some basic robots that can drive around and build and assemble things you send there, and then potentially also set up some basic science experiments. In the future, bring in also fuel. So there seems to be water in the south pole of both south and north pole of the Moon, and there might be a way of extracting that water. So first of all, that's cool. If you have water, you could have life there, as in bring in life there. And the second thing, fuel, is oxygen and hydrogen. And if you manage to split them into 2, you have rocket fuel that you can use. So it could be a stop on your way somewhere further out. And there is already one big company called Shackleton that tries and figure out whether it's feasible to actually make fuel on the Moon and make it as a sort of a pit stop before we go to any other planets. Right, so that's a lot of ambitious goals. How can you actually profit from those? Well, first of all, if you are a small or medium-sized enterprise, as most startups are, you can go to the small and medium-sized enterprises website that we have at the European Space Agency website and learn a lot there. I won't go into that, but you can learn there exactly how to set up your own company, how to work with ESA. There's lots of tutorials there. If you actually start working with missions that are being built right now, you'll be a lot on this website. That's called EMITS. EMITS is a tender system. So we put there information about all the space missions we're building right now, all the things we would like you guys to build for us. For example, I just picked that as a random example. Right now, there's an open invitation to tender for an exobiology facility that's going to go to International Space Station. The price range is over 500k euro. This varies a lot. And you can see some countries have preferences when it comes to being selected or not. And you can go into the website and search. It's open. You don't even have to log in. You can go on this website, even right now, and start searching for what exactly ESA is willing to pay for in the next couple of years. Some of the tenders close tomorrow. Some of the tenders will close in 2020. So you have a lot of time to prepare. Now, if you're not interested in building specific space-grade instruments, etc., you're just a startup that wants to profit from space exploration and from the stuff we do in orbit, well, there just happen to be ESA business incubation centers. There isn't one in Poland yet, at least. There is one in Czech Republic, just next door, and basically all around Poland, but all around Europe. But you don't have to be a citizen of these countries specifically. You have to be a citizen of the European Space Agency country. You don't have to be, say, Czech to be able to work from the Business Incubation Center in Czech Republic. So you can see there's a whole bunch of them. The main ones are listed there on the top right. And you can submit proposals on how you're going to use your space-related idea, space-related technology, but within a non-space market. So for the business incubation centers, we're not interested in you guys building space missions. We're interested in you using space missions to your advantage by doing some business on Earth. For example, if you build a map application that uses GPS or will be using our Galileo system in the future, this will be exactly the kind of thing that BICs are searching for. So the next deadline for application is already the 23rd of May in some cases, so you might have very little time to prepare for that. Next round this year is in October 2016, so you can start looking into applying by that time. And this is geared specifically for startups. Obviously, you cannot be older than 5 years, so you have to be a new company, and you will have to move to where the BIC is. So if you, for example, would like to have your company within the Business Incubation Center in Harwell, you have to look into moving to Harwell. Right, so that's what we've been doing on the ESA side, but we're also looking into the future, what beyond the horizon of 10 to 20 years, and especially in Poland as well. So this is the number, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. This is the amount of money that flows through the space sector in total in Poland in 2015, according to Grant Thornton, a consulting group. So last year in Poland, so 2 years ago, last year, all of the space sector in Poland was worth about 6 billion zlotys. And in just a year, it went up by 1 billion. What do I mean by the wide space sector? Well, everything that profits directly, but I mean directly, from space exploration, from the satellites we have in orbit, etc., not indirectly. So the kind of businesses that cannot live without space. So if, for example, you have a company that utilizes GPS or Galileo, then you are within this group of people. If you have a company that, say, does logistics, and you just happen to have an option of using GPS within your logistics application, then you're not within this kind of group of people because you can survive without GPS. So in just a year, this has grown by about 1 billion. And we need more people to work within the space sector as well. Only recently, the head of the Polish Space Agency estimated that we'll need about 100 new space engineers and people working in the space sector per year over the next couple of years. So we basically need a lot of people. And to get into even further distant future, in 2040, this might translate into a massive number of people that we just do not have. And there's two ways we can go about it. We can either bring them from abroad, or we can educate them here. And if in 2040 we want to have a whole bunch of 40-year-old engineers, or if I go into somebody more impressive to you guys, a 44-year-old engineers, that means right now we have to start educating 16-year-olds. And that was me when I was 16 years old, so a couple of years ago. I haven't changed that much. So how do we approach doing that? Well, we have to get the 16-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the 13-year-olds and start educating them on how to get the skills, figure out they want to do a career in space, and then build their awareness that there is such a thing as a career in space, and start doing it now. And we're working already with 2, well, even more startup companies that help us doing that right now. And I'll tell you about 2 specific cases of doing that. And so the 3 things we do within my project that I run at the Copernicus Science Centre, which is called ESERO, is 1, we teach young kids knowledge and skills we figure they might need in the future. And I'll be asking you guys in a second what skills you think they should be learning. Second thing we do is we support careers. We try to tell kids what they can do in the future related to space. And finally, we do talks like that to tell people that there is such a thing as ESA. So how does it exactly work? Well, we have 2 interesting projects that we work on right now in Poland, but the ESERO network is in almost every country that the European Space Agency is in throughout Europe. There's a whole bunch of us. The first project we have run is CANSATS in Europe, and the second one is REMI. So the question we asked ourselves is, what kind of skills and techniques you guys in your startups need? What makes you a good startup person? So we figured out, first of all, you're on your own, so you need to manage your projects well. You need to do a lot of prototyping, most likely, before you release your final product. You need to do fundraising, obviously. You need the skill of, we call it the being out there-ness, the out and about-ness, the networking, basically. And you need to be flexible in what you do in your startup, and you need a good knowledge of your specific area. And the funny thing is, in our schools, in Poland at least, what we do with kids, we tell them the knowledge, and that's about it. Ask yourself, in a Polish school, have you learned prototyping? Or in any school you have been to, have you learned project management? Or have you learned how to fundraise? I haven't at all. There was not a single class in my entire 10+ year long educational career where anybody would be teaching me how to fundraise or how to prototype or how to manage my school projects. Not at all. So this is the kind of we figured out we'll teach kids how to do it by setting a challenging project. And the project was to build and launch a mini satellite. Specifically, we decided to build a rocket, which you can see over there. And we worked with a Polish startup company called Bowman Dynamics. And guys that work there built a rocket for us. I mean, even 2 rockets altogether, which was a sort of an experiment for them as well. And we launched this sort of small can-sized satellites, you can see over there, to an altitude of about 3,000 meters. But the kids have to go through a whole process to get there.
Dobrze. W całości? Gotowy do lotu kolejnego?
Tak, działa nawet.
Pokaż.
Czekaj, włączyłem świetnie. Proszę bardzo, widać diody.
No pięknie.
Here you can see the result. The CANSAT has actually made it all the way up and then landed and actually survived the landing. So kids have to go through the entire process of getting there. First, we invite their supervisors, their teachers to workshops at the Copernicus Science Centre and give them like the basic skills. And by the way, I'm kind of on the lookout for a startup that's going to help me running these workshops. Secondly, kids have to design and construct their satellites. And that means a lot of prototyping, a lot of reporting, etc. So they work on it for 6 months and then keep sending to us and our jury the information about what they're planning, what they're intending to do, what they have already built, has it worked, etc. And then after 6 months, we decide whether their satellites are ready to be launched or not. And we follow very closely the procedure that we actually use at ESA to figure out whether an actual satellite, a real satellite, is ready to be launched into orbit. Then we launch it on a rocket. It's a really challenging thing because it pulls 15 G at start. It's really hard even to survive for some satellites the launch, not even the fall later on. But I think the critical and the most interesting part of it is that, so this is the procedure we set them to go through, a very similar procedure to what we do at ESA. They actually have to prepare a preliminary design review, just design their satellite, prototype, and get some money to keep building. Then they have to go for a critical design review. They have to finalize their design, prototype, do some outreach. And then finally, they have to build it, convince us that this is going to fly, and then we test it. But I think the most crucial and interesting part of this project to me is that kids that are in secondary schools and high schools have to do outreach, and 10% of their final score is based on outreach, whether they are out and about, whether they go to conferences, whether they talk to media, and we're not helping them with that. But also, they're 100% self-funded. And the cost of building a satellite is 500 euro. To you and me, maybe that's not a lot. But to a high school student, 500 euro is a lot of money, especially if you need to convince someone to give you the 500 euro to build this satellite. And you're trying to convince companies, etc. Why would they believe you, a high school student, that this is going to work? So we started this year with 10 teams, 80 students, some hopes and dreams. And I'm super happy to say that we finished. Through the process, they wrote 24 reports, over 1,000 pages of technical notes. They fundraised 4,000 euro altogether for all their space missions. They built 20 prototypes, and in the end, we launched 7 of the satellites, so that's 70% success rate. I'm pretty happy with that. But also, we supported one startup in actually exploring whether they'll be able to build their rockets cheaply and efficiently over the next couple of years. And this is kind of how the kids work, which to me is really impressive. This is the plan they have for the next couple of years, for the next couple of weeks building a satellite that's going to be launched in Portugal in June. And my favorite part from it, if you do not understand Polish, is when they say promotion. Promotion that this time we will award some time to. Or there is spare parts and this time we buy everything twice. And testing, this time we actually test. But the interesting part to me is that this is actually, I wouldn't be too surprised if some of you guys have been preparing plans like that for the next couple of months in your startups. And I'm really happy to see that happening from kids' own motivation on their own. They just let me see the document, but they build it on their own 100% and even invited an industry expert to review it and figure out whether this makes sense or not. And you can see the team that is actually doing it there on the bottom. And they actually had to go through a lot of grilling from our side to be able to be awarded the finals of this competition. And you can see on the top left side, top right hand side, this is how we were grilling them. So that's one of the projects. And the second one, the last one I'm going to tell you about, is REMI. So we figured also, there's a question about what sort of innovative techniques do you guys use in the business world. And I know that some of the hot topics right now is remote presence, it's distributed teams, virtual augmented reality, use of scientific data, 3D printing, scanning, robotic production, etc. Again, things you'll never encounter at school unless your teachers are absolutely amazing. So we figured we need another project to introduce kids to these topics. So we do it by collaborating with another startup, this time an ABM Space Education from Toruń. And they built for us a platform where there is a real 3D printed Mars rover that you can see over there. It's pretty tiny, that's small. It has 2 video cameras on it, one on the top and one on the hand. And you actually drive it through an application, through a web application that you can see on the left. It shows you a simulated Mars terrain. This is the same way that people at NASA drive their Martian rovers. They actually use simulated terrains and augmented reality, etc. But actually what you can see on the top left, there are 2 sort of screens within a screen. And these screens show you what the rover can see. So this is, imagine that this rover is sending these images to you back to Earth. And you decide what you're going to do next basing on those. You have the simulated image as well, but can you trust it? Depends on you. So right now there's a competition running with 25 groups of kids from 25 schools in Poland. That actually access these rovers remotely and then drive them around a simulated Martian crater. They had to go through a similar process. We started with workshops where we taught the teachers how to actually run a project like that. Then they had to do a very important step. They had to prepare a flight plan. So not only they just get to drive the rover straight away, they have to figure out where are they going to go exactly, where is it safe to go, how would they go about for example, investigating what's happening inside of this crater. And interestingly enough, we didn't give them anything more than a satellite image of a crater and told them, look, you're a scientist now, you figure out what to do. We'll give you 2 engineers that will work with you. You have 2 scientists, and figure out what do you want to do in this crater, what is worth doing. And they actually seem to be doing pretty well in that. And then finally, if we accept their flight plans, they can actually run the simulated Martian mission. And the best team that's going to win will have an amazing opportunity of going to the European Rover Challenge this year later on and help out a little bit and run with the big boys. One of the big boys sitting there, the organizer of the European Rover Challenge. And so that's what we've been doing. And to be honest, I'm super curious, what do you think about? Because our goal is to basically create startups in future. And we need to know what these startups will need, what the people that we're trying to teach will need. So I have a couple of questions to you guys. Now, that's a lot. I'm not going to ask about every single thing here. But these are some of the proposals for the kind of skills we think kids will need in the future. They were proposed by a couple of people working within the educational industry. And I would just like to ask you guys for a quick show of hands, and I'll tell you how this is going to go. Looking at the left side, just the blue things, look at all of these skills. Imagine you, as a startup, are hiring a person to work within your startup. Out of all these skills, you can choose only 3. He's gonna be, or she's gonna be awesome in these 3 things. Really good coder, amazing tech skills, and speaks English. But it's gonna be absolutely worthless in everything else. And I'm really curious, out of all these, have a look at those, spend 10 seconds deciding, choose 3 things you would want from the person you're going to hire. And I'm going to ask you for a sort of rapid fire show of hands in a second. I'll be mentioning, say, flexibility, and I want all of you guys who selected flexibility to raise your hand. And I'm gonna go quick. Right, all of you guys ready? And we are, by the way, recording it, so I have it for future reference, and I'll be building my future educational projects basing on you guys right now. So, flexibility. Specific tech skills. Foreign languages. Coding. Soft skills. Ability to learn continuously. Problem solving. Networking skills. Hard science knowledge. Oh, there is someone. Fundraising skills. Not at all. And writing. Okay, we've got it? Cool. So I'll be reviewing it later on, and I'll actually, on our ESERO website and on my Twitter, you can find me at Jakub Bochiński. I'll be posting the results of this quick, rapid-fire questioning you guys about it, and we'll be building our future educational projects basing on that. But now let's get to something more difficult. Now we go one by one, and these are tougher decisions. If you're about to hire someone, would you want that person to have a strong moral code? Because I know and you know, there have been and there are companies around the world that are pretty successful. And they're pretty successful because they base their success on not really behaving very ethically. Now, asking you guys, if you were to hire someone, would it be important to you to hire someone with a strong moral code, with ethics? Raise your hands, those that would. Okay, got it? Now, how important to you would be that the person that you hire is passionate? Okay, passion seems to be winning so far. Now, the aptitude to break rules. Do you want someone to break rules, or do you want someone to behave, him or herself? Breaking rules. I thought you were a whole bunch of disrupting companies that break the rules. Right, so independence, and I mean here like the stubborn independence. Okay, 1, 2, 6. Right, this what I mentioned here is the money drive. Would you hire someone with a strong kind of money drive? They just want to make a lot of money. Is that the kind of a person you'd be searching for your company? Money is a strong motivator. And then finally, the age-old conundrum, talented or hardworking? Now, who of you would hire a talented person but pretty lazy? Talented but lazy, okay. Hardworking but not that talented. A grafter. Wow, that's pretty much half-half split, and I'll be really curious to ask you guys later why exactly. Right, so I'll finish here. Thank you very much for that. I'll leave you with the quote that actually is a motto of the Advanced Concepts team. As for the future, your task is not to foresee it, but to enable it. that's the work I do, and thank you very much for helping me with that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. A lot out there in space, a lot of opportunities in space, cosmic opportunities. Are there any questions, quick questions right now?
Yep.
Hi, Alexandra. In the UK, we talk a lot about giving opportunity to women in technology as well as kids who might come from underprivileged background.
Yeah.
So I wonder what your stance is when you're approaching these schools and whether you're trying to get a good balance of skills and opportunities.
So it is really important to me as well. And the interesting statistic I can show you about one of the projects that we have run, the REMI project, we actually approached kids from, well, basically we had people applying to us from all around of Poland. And we decided we're going to select them only, the schools that are going to take part in the project, only basing on their passion, on their interest in the project, on their activity in the past related to what they've been doing, absolutely ignoring whether they're from a good school, bad school, huge city, tiny city, etc. In the end, we had 50 applications from all around Poland, 25 of them coming from Warsaw. We don't have a single team from Warsaw in the competition because they just weren't good enough. On the other hand, over 50% of the teams that are taking part in the competition are from towns below 20,000 people. So that's really tiny villages, really. And that just goes to show that we didn't have a specific criteria for it, that we're going to select kids from smaller cities or from bigger cities or girls or guys. Oh, and by the way, the girl-boy split is 48%. So that's pretty good as well. And we have not set it as a criteria on its own. We just wanted to first explore who's going to come to us to start with. And it just goes to show that it doesn't really matter whether you are a girl or a guy, whether you are from a large town or from a small town. When it comes to space and how kids especially are interested in specifically this area of science, everybody seems to be interested when they are kids. And everybody wants to do something about it. And I'm really glad that especially girls and kids from smaller towns are not afraid, at least anymore, to actually take part in these challenges in our projects. And for the concept competition, the statistics are very similar. Over 40% girls, and when it comes to 7 teams that got to the final, only 2 of them were from towns over 200,000 inhabitants, so from the major towns. The majority of them from smaller towns. And it is important to me as well. So if in the future we had problem with people coming only from larger towns or only from privileged neighborhoods or privileged private schools, etc., we would do something to work by opening the whole educational program further. And we are doing it right now also with the REMI project, because the concept project requires your school to have a place to tinker, a place to build a satellite. And some schools go to local universities to do it, other schools do it in their own workshops, or they have a dad or a friend who has a workshop. But we figured that's a limitation. Some people might not have access to workshops like that. So that's where the REMI project came from. If you have a remotely controlled rover, you can be anywhere in Poland or anywhere even out abroad and take part in this competition. The only thing you need is a computer and a connection to the internet. But at least in Poland, we are in a lucky situation where most people do have those. That's a very good question.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Big round of applause for Kuba.